So welcome everybody. My name is Brandon Protus. I am a strategy director here at Complete College America, and we are thrilled to be partnering with the Nevada System of Higher Education to bring you this series of professional development as you get ready to do the full implementation of Corequisite support. Today's session is the online instruction for the Corequisite English course. This is part 2. And we have wonderful presenters who are coming from in the state of Nevada. That is Laura Decker from NSC and Emily King from TMCC. We'd like to start off first with a welcome, and that's going to be from Renee Davis. She is the Assistant Vice Chancellor and Director of Student Affairs at NSCHI. Renee, can you give a welcome, please?
Sure. I'm here on behalf of Vice Chancellor Crystal Abbott. And I wanted to thank you all for putting pause on your busy schedule so you can be here to participate in this professional development session. Especially thanks to Laura and Emily for putting this much desired presentation together. And I really look forward to sticking around to hear all of the content. In the fashion that Crystal has opened up all the other PDs, I wanted to start off with a quote. And I think it's particularly apt in terms of all the talk that we've been doing in both the English and the math PD sessions about growth mindset. So the quote's from David M. Burns, and it's aim for success, not perfection. Never give up your right to be wrong, because then you will lose the ability to learn new things and move forward with your life. And with that, I will hand it over to the presenters.
And I've said it before, and it means a lot. The way that this has been put together is through the support of NSCHI, as well as the Nevada English Corequisite English Task Force, who really decided for the content for these. So a little bit about Complete. Our strategies for student success, and we've divided those into 4 pillars of purpose, momentum, structure, and support. These are very connected, so they're not separate strategies that work in vacuums, but I do want to point out that Corequisite support is one of our long-standing strategies, our game changer strategies. In fact, we just released a signature report just a few weeks ago called No Room for Doubt, Moving Corequisite Support from Idea to Imperative, and has the data to show the impact that Corequisite can have, as well as recommendations at all levels from policy down to practice. We know you're in front of a computer, and so we will put a link in the chat for the Complete College America website, which is completecollege.org. We encourage you to sign up. And by doing so, you can have access to our latest news and resources. And for example, you can download a copy of the report if you don't already have it, just by signing in there. Also, the what you see here is the list of professional development sessions throughout. And while we are getting towards the end, we have today's session and we have one final one on Friday. I've also put a flyer for that in the chat. The reason I'm putting these out here now is because we've recorded all of these sessions. We know that faculty, both full-time as well as adjunct faculty, are watching these when they're not able to watch them live. So we encourage you, if you have not seen some of the ones in the past, to be able to go back and see those. Also put a link in the chat for the NSCHI website, where you can find information about the initiative overall, as well as some of the recordings. And Renee, if you can put in a link to the YouTube channel, that would also be good. And with that, I want to turn it over. We have 2 great presenters, Laura Decker from Nevada State College and Emily King from Truckee Meadows, who are going to be presenting on the online English Corequisite teaching, and this is part 2. So if you want, you can take it away, Emily.
All right, thank you, Brandon. And thanks to all of you guys for being here today. I know it's a super busy time in the semester, so we're grateful that you took this time. So for today, Laura and I are going to share some best practices and strategies, practical strategies for teaching online co-recs. Our main focus is going to be on the asynchronous course, but most of what we're talking about will also apply to teaching web live classes. We're going to be using the chat for to ask you questions and to ask you to share some things during the presentation. So you want to make sure your chat is open. Then we'll have a Q&A at the end, and if we have time, we'll do a breakout discussion then. We also are going to share all of these resources with you at the end, so you'll have access to everything, all the links and everything that we're sharing today. So the 4 areas that we wanted to focus on today are best practices for success in co-requisite courses. We think they're especially important for online co-recs, and they are a strong instructor presence, thoughtful course design, opportunities for metacognition, and focus on building community. And so I'm going to begin just talking about that component of having a strong instructor presence. Some of the benefits, just to give you an overall, are to first set a foundation for building community. Laura's going to talk about ways to build community in a little bit, but having you as the instructor be very present sets that foundation. It also helps to ease student anxiety. It helps them to get engaged in the course right away, to build confidence. It makes teaching more fun for you because you're more of a participant. But I think most importantly, it actually boosts cognition. And there's a lot of research on the connection between emotional engagement and cognition. And what specifically comes to mind is Zaretta Hammond's work on culturally responsive teaching. And she basically says that we shouldn't ignore the emotional engagement and that connection to how it can boost cognition. So I want to begin by asking you to put something in the chat. I want you to think about a past instructor that you have had, and just think about that individual. And in the chat, I want you to put either an adjective or a short description of that instructor. How would you describe them to your colleagues or peers? All right, I see passionate, uncommonly kind, approachable and concerned about each student, artistic, nurturing, invested, organized. Okay, passionate, demanding, but in a good way. Okay, good. So hopefully you're starting to see that these seem like very different people, right? They seem like they're individual in character. And I would bet that it was easy for these instructors to come to mind. You thought of them quickly. There are certain instructors that we remember for certain reasons, right? And all of these things are important for them in terms of their instructor presence, but notice that they're all different. So what I want to point out is that you don't have to have a certain kind of personality or a certain ethos to be present in your class. And I think that there's a myth out there that you have to be the warm and fuzzy type to really have a strong instructor presence. And I think what really we need to focus on is to be individual and to be genuine. So just to really be who you are in the class is really helpful for students. And before I move on, I just want to point out these images, these sketches on the right here are from my students' feedbacks that they give me at the end of the semester, where I ask them to sketch 3 moments that they remember from class. And these are from 4 different students, but I have stacks and stacks of these that I've collected. And when I look at this portion of their sketches, I always notice that there are people in the sketches. Very rarely are they, of other things. And so what that says to me is that what students really remember are those moments that they connect. So sometimes it's their peers, a lot of times it's me, but all of the people in the class really matter to their engagement. Okay, so how do we get our presence in the class? Well, I think the 3 things that you need to think about first are your welcome email, your student survey, and your syllabus. And so with your welcome email, you should send that out before the class begins. I like to send mine a week before to give them time to get the textbook, because I assume they haven't done that yet. But what this really does is creates initial contact with you, puts them at ease. We often forget about how much anxiety students have before classes begin. They don't know what to expect. And so it can help to give them just some basic information in that welcome email, how to connect to Canvas, what to do if they can't log into Canvas, when class starts. Sometimes they don't even know that, what textbooks to get, and maybe some ideas about how to get them. And so this is a good way to establish that connection, but also gives them an email to respond if they need to ask you something else. It makes it easy for them. So the next thing is that student survey. And I know most of us are probably doing some kind of questionnaire in the first week, but it's important to think about that student survey as the initial connection with you and the beginning of your ongoing dialogue that you will have throughout the course with them. So this begins the conversation. I do mine for my web classes as a graded survey. I give them some free points. And I always use the essay questions form so that they can write as much as they want rather than a multiple choice. And then I respond to them individually, and that creates that initial dialogue. The next thing is the syllabus, and it's really important because this establishes the ethos of the class, I think. In addition to the welcome email and student survey. So you want to use language that's open and warm. You want your syllabus to be personal and inviting. And it's important to make it your own. So you want to insert pictures, graphics if you want. You can even brand it. And by brand it, I mean, make it match other handouts and documents in your class. An easy way to do that is to use the newsletter templates in Word. And if you use, and then it's easy because you have a template, so it kind of speeds up your process too. You might consider adding a section in your syllabus called What You May Want to Know About Me. And you can put things there like that you think students are trying to figure out. Early in the semester when students are just trying to kind of get the lay of the land for your class. And it's really helpful to just tell them things about you, like, I really care about attendance. I notice when you're not here. Or they can be things that don't connect to specific assignments or the class, but just things about you that they might want to know. And I try to put things in there that have to do with what I really value as a teacher and really care about. And the students who are in particular interested in getting a high grade, they really care about that section. So in general, you want your syllabus to exhibit excitement about the class and about teaching in general. Because if you're not motivated for the class, then they won't be either. I have some links over here on the right for some different kinds of syllabi that you may want to consider. The first is an infographic type, and the link there is a resource for you to be able to make one of those. They're really easy and they're kind of more fun to read, so you may get students reading your syllabus more. And the other one is the liquid syllabus, which I think is also another fun one. And it's basically looks like a website. You can use Google Sites to do it, and I have links there to those. There's also a how to create a liquid syllabus where she walks you through it step by step. So that's fun, and I think students are more likely to read them. In terms of your instructor presence, you want to think about how you're present in the class, even in an asynchronous course. So it's helpful to sort of think about your teacher values and whether or not your class reflects those values. Where your values should be really clear are in your Meet Your Instructor page. So if you don't have a page dedicated to just introducing yourself, you should add that to your welcome module. And this is a place where you can share your general interests, tell them why you teach and maybe why you teach this class in particular. You can add pictures, and especially if it's a web class, you should have a video intro. Students really like when they can hear your voice and see your face in action. You also want to make sure that you be yourself in assignments and in class interactions. So, and that goes back to, the exercise where we thought about the instructors that we remember. Some of them were funny and some of them were more serious. They have different personalities. So it's important to just be yourself. And ways that you can kind of participate and be present in the class are, don't skip yourself on question of the day. I had a bad habit of doing that, and my students would always point it out and say, well, what about you? And I realized they want my response as well. So it's not being egotistical to participate in the class activity. It's also helpful to be vulnerable. I know this is a hard one, but the more vulnerable we can be, the more human we can seem to our students, the easier it is for them to connect with us. So if you mess something up, it's okay to say, oh, I messed this up. I checked the wrong box on this assignment. It's not really due that day, whatever it is. And it's fine to explain that. It also can be helpful to share some of your own writing. So if you're doing some kind of writing professionally, you can share that. And especially if it's part of a peer review process, it's helpful for them to see your feedback and understand that you're a writer as well. But if you're not doing any current writing for publication, you can just utilize assignments to bring some of your own, details into the class. So one example is when I teach analysis, I like to compare it to summary, and I have them write a summary of their high school experience. And then, and I start that by sharing a summary of my high school experience. And they think it's funny because I put the dates in there and they're like a long time ago. And then I have them ask me questions, and then we use one of those questions to establish a foundation for our analysis. So it creates connection, but also teaches them the material. So in general, you want to create assignments that allow interaction with you. And I think it's fine to interject yourself within reason so that you're not, taking over the class and making it all about you, but understand that they do want to know you on a personal level. So you can just do things like feedback responses to work that has been graded. Ask them to respond to those specific feedback. Or a lot of pre-writing work is a good place to get your, to get your presence there. Like if you have an I am assignment where they have to just make a statement, I am statements, a list of them. Then present yours first so that you're giving them a model, and then they can kind of, see how to do it, but also learn some things about you. And I use that list and our writing territories list to help them choose topics that they are invested in. And we have an ongoing writing territories list throughout the semester. And I just had a note here that Bell Hooks always talks about how it's important to do what you ask students to do. And you have to do this within reason. I mean, you're not going to write every single essay, but especially with pre-writing work, it's easy to do it alongside with them. And it creates a good connection between you. And of course, gives them models for how to do it. So in general, you want to also create opportunities to connect. So especially in your asynchronous classes, you can try to build in conferences. You can do them live if that works with the scheduling, or if you don't have time to meet with them one-on-one, you can do small group meetings. It also helps to take notes on the student roster to learn about them. So as you're doing like student surveys, jot things down. It helps when you remember things like the name of their dog or where they work. You can refer to those things later, and it establishes that connection. Another thing I do is these check-ins. So they're similar to the survey, but every few weeks, I just ask them to do a quick survey where I ask them questions about how things are going. And sometimes they have to do with the assignment and sometimes they don't, but it gives us an opportunity to connect one-on-one if we don't have time for live conference. Another thing you want to do is just let Canvas work for you. So think about the Canvas features. In terms of whole class communication, you should be sending a start the week email or something that signifies the beginning of the week. It helps to send due date reminders. So with links to the assignments, that is very helpful for them. I had a student who would always tell me how helpful those reminders were. And for a while I thought maybe I'll stop sending these because I don't even know if anyone cares about them. But he said, oh no, because I wear an Apple Watch and when I'm at work, I get your reminder and then I go to the break room and I make sure I got all my assignments in. So they really, they access your course in different ways. So those reminders, if you've helped them set up their notifications well, they can be helpful to them. You can give global feedback as announcements. So these are ways to kind of be efficient as an instructor, which we're always trying to do because we have so many students, right? So giving global feedback, you don't have to, give feedback on every single individual assignment. But, and also we tend to give the same kinds of feedback. So that's especially helpful. And you can do this global feedback on discussion threads as well. In terms of individual feedback, I think it's really helpful in terms of instructor presence to use the comment box as an opportunity for dialogue, get a conversation going back and forth. And that's a simple, easy way to do it. And then if, like I said, if they have their notifications set up, then they know when you have responded with a comment. You can use annotations on the actual assignment as well, if you want to give like specific feedback, as you probably know. But in terms of that connection, again, it helps to give recommendations for outside sources. We actually do have students who want to read more than we're assigning, believe it or not. And a lot of times they'll be writing about something and I'll think of a source that, I haven't assigned, but it's really a source that they may want to use. Or it can be something like a Netflix documentary or something. And that also helps them to see that, oh, we can use different kinds of sources that aren't just the readings or, the library database stuff. If you're copying and pasting, which we all probably do to save time, it helps if you can add the student name and tailor the paste so that it is really specific to their assignment, their work. And then last thing for that individual feedback for creating a connection with you is to think about adding video or audio comments on the assignments. So in SpeedGrammar, you can actually just record a comment of yourself, and that saves time. We can talk faster than we can type sometimes. And it also feels personal. They really like that. All right, so before I talk about course design, I wanted to see if we had any thoughts about what I just presented. Maybe put a takeaway in the chat, something that you'd want to try or a question that you have. Oops. Okay, I want to learn more about the liquid syllabi. Yeah, so the liquid syllabus, it's a really fun way, and I'm working on one right now for my summer class. I personally think it's more fun to create as an instructor, but I also think it's what the students are so used to reading things online that I think they're more likely to look at it. The instructor on the link that I put on that page, the how-to link, she actually makes changes to it over the course of the semester. So that might be something that's helpful. Of course, you'll have to ask your institution if that's acceptable. I think though that with all of the changes that we've seen over the last 18 months, we're not giving a paper syllabus to anybody, that this might be a good time to introduce the liquid syllabus to your institution. They might be more open to it. Angie says, I always do a welcome to the week page as a weekly front page. Yeah. So I can put links to assignments in that. How do you put links into a Canvas email? So Angie, if you do a Canvas email, the best thing to do, I think, is to actually create an announcement. The announcement will send it out to all of your students, and then you can link to whatever you want in the class. And Elaine says, I appreciate all the good information. Okay, good. All right, you're welcome, Angie. And I didn't say this at the beginning, but if I forget to say it at the end, if any of you have questions about details for me or Laura, we have our email on this slideshow, and feel free to email us for any follow-up questions. We're happy to talk about this further. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about thoughtful course design. I think that course design is underestimated in terms of what it can do for the student experience of learning and meeting those learning objectives. And I think some of the benefits of having a solidly constructed class are mainly that it really can lessen student frustration. I have college students living in my house who are taking online courses, so I've had the benefit of getting to sort of see it from the outside. And it's been interesting to see how good organization can engage the student or disengage the student. So they engage more with the material, and then it will improve their learning, help them meet learning objectives. They're more likely to complete assignments and subsequently improve their overall grade. So for a minute, I want to just have you think about, in your web classes in particular, are there typical questions that you get about where to find things or how to do something in your class? And if you can think of that, throw it in chat. You know, those emails that you get at 11 o'clock at night. What are students asking you? How do I find my peer reviews? Yes, and I see that one twice. Or how do I find the feedback on my assignments? Right. Finding the peer reviews is a big one. They're looking for things, right? They can't find things, and we can probably guess that they've looked at least a little bit before emailing us, right? Some students tend to just ask questions right away, but yes, the peer reviews in Canvas, that's a common question. So I want to look at and some of this course design and kind of try to figure out how to help them you know, answer their own questions before with our course design before they have to ask. So I want to think first about the big picture. So when I'm talking about big picture, what I mean is how the student is experiencing the class. So you want to think about the experience you want them to have, right? Try to get out of your teacher head when you're organizing your class and think about how the student is going to experience it. And so this begins by helping them get set up. So like I said, you should have them a welcome module, even if you know, you do some other welcome kind of activity. It helps to have all the welcome materials in one place, I think. Over here on the right, I've just sort of copied the pages I have in my first two modules, which are my welcome module and my week 1 welcome week module. So students have to complete these two modules by the end of the first week. I send out that in, you know, the welcome email a week before and invite them to get started on the welcome module so that they can, you know, get through those things and get some questions answered. But there are things like a let's get started page and steps to setting up what I want their Canvas dashboard to look like. I always encourage them to use the card view because the card view includes the to-do list, which is one place where the peer reviews show up. And I can usually direct them to that when they are having trouble finding them. And I know this because when my son was taking classes at my institution and I saw his Canvas page, I thought, well, that looks weird. That's not what mine looks like. And that's when I realized, oh, that's the default. So the default, I can't remember what it's called, but it's not the card view with the boxes like we usually see. You may want to also in that welcome module include videos. So things like about time management is important for students. They're figuring out how to juggle all these things, multiple classes, jobs, and all that. So a quick video about how you want them to use the Canvas calendar, or if you want them to use it at all, if they should use a paper calendar. You know, those things that kind of come naturally to us can be really helpful to them. And then, like I said before, I do a welcome week. I started doing this for my 16-week courses because we have the time where I basically spend a week, you know, starting to build a community and giving them basic information like how I want them to work each week through the class, how they can submit assignments. So I give them a video that shows them how to submit their assignments, information on where they can get their textbooks. I do some introductory stuff on critical reading and the writing process, but I really just use that to help them get established in the class before we get started with Unit 1. In thinking about that big picture, you want to aim for a balance of structure and flexibility. And I keep coming back to this theme in my course design and in everything that I'm doing, because I think for CoRecs especially, and with our online CoRecs, you have to think about the structure that they need, because they definitely need structure, but also where can you give flexibility so that, you know, if they're working a longer shift, which a lot of our students are, especially in the health field now, you know, all of a sudden they get called in and they have to work, you know, a graveyard shift. And so can you give them some flexibility so that it's still worthwhile for them to do the assignment, but, you know, you can take it late. So what I started doing is taking late work until the end of the unit. And this is working well for me. I used to be a no late work person because I thought, oh, I want to keep them on track, right? But I realized that they do need a little bit more wiggle room. So I take late work on most assignments, not peer review because it depends on other people, for any assignments until the end of the unit, and then I want them to move on. I also give them a one-time late pass. So in my face-to-face class, I actually make a cute little late pass that they can use on paper. But in the web class, they get, this is just part of the syllabus, and they can use it on a final draft for an extra 2 days with no penalty. And they like that autonomy of deciding when they want to use that. And then in general, you want to work on building in more scaffolding and more feedback. And I don't have time to talk specifically about doing this, but in co-rec classes across the board, the scaffolding, the extra scaffolding matters to help them walk them through the writing process. And you want to think about how they need to write often, and then give extra feedback on their process work. The other thing in terms of organization is thinking about the function of your homepage. So it's important, again, to think back to that. How are they experiencing my class? What do I want them to see when they come to the homepage? And how will they be navigating? So you should be wary of having too much on your homepage, even though you want to give them quick access, because it can be overwhelming and they may not find what they're looking for. But think about what you want them to have easy access to. I really like consistency and patterns. I think that's helpful to students. So I don't change my homepage, but I know a lot of instructors do. So you guys might like, changing it based on what you're doing that week. I think, I know some of you will, connect to the module on the homepage or whatever it is that you want them to see when they first sign on. In my start the week email, I give them a link to the module we're working on. So that's another reason I don't change the homepage, because I think most of them are clicking that and going directly to our module. So just think about how they're navigating the class and what they're doing on a weekly basis. You should also think about the optics of the homepage, even if they don't visit it every time they sign on. You want it to look appealing, right? I have a link here for, so you can use hex codes to get some colors that are more than just the generic colors. I'm not a big fan of green, but I often use green because it's our school color. And so I spent way too much time trying to get the exact color of green as our mascot, which I don't know if the students notice, but those things matter to me. And I think it's pretty close, at least on my monitor. You can also add buttons. Buttons are a fun way to add visual interest and ease of navigation. And I have a link there that explains how to do that technically. But if you keep it simple, that's fine, but you should at least adjust your left sidebar menu to only include the links that they really need. So if you don't want students to have access to certain things, then take them out. But think about what you want them to have access to. So if you have like pages on there, that might confuse them. I don't even have links to specific assignments because I want them to go through the modules. And there's directions for adding links to that left side menu on our resources page if you want to add a link to an outside resource. And then last, in terms of organizing modules, you want to chunk information for optimal experience. So we've all probably signed on to online classes and seen like a list of 25 pages in a module and got scared because it's overwhelming. It's just too much. And it kind of, I think, unmotivates students to do the work. So think about how the structure of your class, and then use text headers to divide sections of the module. So for example, if you want to sort of walk them through the week chronologically, you may have a text header that says complete by Monday, complete by Wednesday, complete by Sunday, or whatever. Or you may want to do it by types of assignments, like this week's readings, this week's writing, whatever. So think about how your class is structured and then chunk your information in the module in the way that you want them to complete the work. It's also helpful to add a page to the end of every module that just says that you've reached the end of the module. And then I have a little instruction that takes them back to the beginning to check that your submissions were successful. So it puts the responsibility on them. But sometimes our students, even though we ask them not to use their phones, they're looking at stuff on their phones, and they may just fly through the end of the module and get into the next module and be confused. So that ending page is helpful. Overall, though, you want to be consistent and specific. So I think it really helps, like I said, to have patterns, have things due on the same day every week at the same time, and also use specific titles on the on your modules that, you know, match each other. See, I have a question. I've never used peer review in my courses. Instead, I use collaboration through Google Doc. Yeah, in the collaboration tab. Yeah, and that's another way you can use that too. And I think Laura's even going to talk about that a little bit when she's talking about building community, because you can kind of do that at the same time, Cassandra. So yeah, there's a lot of people who hate peer review in Canvas. It's clunky a little bit. So Google Docs is another way to do it if you prefer to do that way. And then so last, I think it's really important to have a course toolkit module. So my toolkit is the very last module, and it's easy for me to send students there rather than say, oh, here, go back and watch this video. It's in week 12 readings, whatever. So I also have sections of my course toolkit, and I've listed them here so that they can easily, you know, go find a handout that they may want to use that we used in a previous unit, or get help with an assignment like my MLA formatting pages there. So obviously all these things are in the modules throughout the course, but I've just recollected in that course toolkit for easy access for them. And then last, you really want to think about how you're setting up your pages in terms of the organization. So it's important to always add pages and then add links to files that you want to insert, like if you have a prompt, and put that link within the textual explanation of it. And I learned this when I took an accessibility course, that it's important for accessibility, but it also really ensures that all of your students don't miss material and also explanation from you. It helps to cross-reference course materials. So in Canvas, you can link to all other places in your course. So if you're talking about something on a page, link them to the thing you're talking about. That is helpful. It helps also to use the accessibility tools. So that rich content editor at the top is important for accessibility, but it also really improves the overall look of the page. It just makes it look more inviting for all students. So you also want to think about making your pages appealing and fun. I have a link over here on the right to a Canvas tutorial on creating pages that look really great. That one's done by the Canvas people. But in general, you want to think about, will it be easy to find key information when they come here later? Use headings and subheadings. If you're putting a YouTube video, instead of just adding the link, use the YouTube icon in the rich content editor, and you can put the video itself in there. It will probably be more likely that they will watch the video because it's bigger and it's more inviting. You can include GIFs, and I have a link there to giphy.com. I also spend way too much time on that page trying to find just the perfect GIF. That's a time waster, but it's fun. And another thing I do is, I told you I'm a little obsessed with our wizard the lizard, especially now that he has a face mask. So I throw him in my course probably on pages that I think most students may not get to or might not be as likely to read. And I offer extra credit. And so he'll give them a little task that they have to do to get the extra credit. And that's just, a way to make the page appealing and fun, and let them know that it's important to read every page of the week. Okay, so before we move on, does anybody, or do you want to just put some things in chat? Do you have any questions or takeaways that you want to share? No, not at this point. Okay, we will have a Q&A at the end. So if something comes up, maybe jot it down, and you can ask questions then. And with that, I'm going to give it over to Laura.
Great. Thank you so much, Emily. Also, I think I just put together who your mascot is. Your mascot is Wizard the Lizard.
Yes.
I was wondering when I saw your slide previously. Also, I think you did a great job with that green. That looks really close.
Good. Looks good on your screen too. Good.
Yeah, it does. It does. Well, hi, everyone. I'm Laura. And the next portion of our webinar is going to look at the important role of reflection and metacognition in co-requisite composition, and how to structure good reflective spaces online. Before we go on, let's take about a minute or so to quickly reflect on where we all stand with reflection. You might consider your own thoughts about reflection in co-requisite composition. Are you offering space or spaces for students to reflect in your courses? And how often are they reflecting, and how formalized is reflection in your course? So is it something that's sort of happening at a whim, or is it something that you're designing the course with these opportunities in mind? So if you are so called to reflect on that, you might just drop some notes in the chat so we can see some of the different ways that we're already using or thinking about reflection in these courses. And I'll just hang out a minute to see if anybody offers anything. Okay, I'll keep going on, but I'll check back to see if anybody drops in something about reflection. So Emily, if you want to go on to the next slide, sorry. Great. Okay, great. So Sierra, you're doing some weekly reflections. Excellent. And I saw somebody else is doing some reflective journal entries, and that's actually something that we'll talk about today. Callie, you said that you're working on including more reflection. And that's, something that you and I can brainstorm about further too. And then Cassandra, you said that you do a reflective essay at the end, and this presentation will also kind of talk about that. So most of us probably, as we're seeing in the chat, we know either from experience or from our own reading and research about teaching that reflection helps students recognize what they know and transfer that knowledge to new contexts. But it's important for us, especially in co-requisite composition, to remember that if we want our students to reflect, we need to build in those opportunities, because reflection is a troublesome concept for developing writers, especially. As Kara Taksak notes, they may see it as an afterthought, or they might think that it will just naturally happen. Other students might avoid it because it feels too emotionally driven. I've actually heard that from many students, and others just might never consider doing it. But it's important to note that it's not just students who might forego reflection for these reasons. We as the instructors might also find it troublesome. So we might think that it's just going to take up too much time, and we have, a limited amount of time with our students. We might think that they won't really benefit from it because they won't take it seriously, or we might even think that they'll just naturally do it. The reflection will just happen. So you can kind of look back at your own thoughts that you put in the chat, or maybe that you jotted down, or just the mental notes that you made, and think about, is reflection troublesome for you? And maybe try to get to the heart of why it might be troublesome. And hopefully after this section, you'll think a little bit more about how you are using reflection, or how you might be able to include it in your courses. Next slide, please. So the first big idea that I want to introduce or address is the way that reading online is different from reading on paper, and your students probably haven't thought much about this. You might agree with me that reading on paper is typically better for comprehension, and that the research generally supports that conclusion, which is true, but our students' preferences might be different from our own, and there's good reason to offer some online reading tasks or opportunities as well. Not only can reading online be a point of accessibility for some students, especially students who might use screen readers, but some research has even shown that it's not the mode of reading itself, online or on paper, it's whether or not it's our preferred mode of reading that actually matters when it comes to comprehension. In other words, having conversations with your students about their reading preferences and discussions about how reading happens differently in different modes can help your students become better readers overall. So how is reading online different from on paper? First, there are different distractions when we read online, which your students may not have thought about, such as visually stimulating images like ads, physically stimulating clicks, and then rabbit holes that never end. Second, research has shown that reader expectations are different for paper-based reading, which readers perceive to require higher effort, and online reading tasks, which readers perceive as naturally easier. Finally, our physical engagement is different for each reading mode. For physical text, readers are more likely to read across lines of text throughout a document, but for online text, readers physically focus on text more often in an F-shaped pattern, giving more preference to the top of the text and then not reading all the way across as they go down. And this is often because readers are just not committed to reading every word in an online publication, again, because their perception that this should be naturally easier. Differences are also typically a result of online text having less formatting, more often being a chunk of text, and then readers just trying to read really efficiently. So to support your students in reflecting on their own reading practices and preferences, the resources on the handout that we've collected include a reading preferences inventory that you can adapt, which asks students a few basic questions about their own reading practices. Additionally, there's a reading mindset activity, which offers students the opportunity to get very intimate with their preferences across print, web, and PDF texts, and that's also adaptable. And then finally, there are also a few articles on how paper and screen reading are different and how you can help students make good decisions about their reading practices. Next slide, please. So the second big concept I want to highlight about reflection and metacognition in co-requisite courses is that reflection can help our students transfer the skills they're learning in our courses to other disciplines. Students don't always see the task we assign in composition as related to the tasks they do in other fields, and we have decades of research and writing studies that show this, even if we see them as related. And so although we may not see our work in composition as only about preparing students for those other disciplines, explicit reflection can still help students bridge those spaces. To help think about ways to make skills and skill transfer explicit, the resources include an adaptable skill transfer reflection prompt, as well as an article with 2 reflection interventions geared toward helping students make those connections. One is an interview that could easily be turned into a survey or some kind of written activity, and the other is actually a blog that asks students to think about the way that their skills in your class and composition are transferring or maybe transferable to other contexts. These activities might be useful staggered throughout the semester or attached to specific class assignments. So again, if you're really thinking about those outcomes in your course, you can think about where they might work best. And then you can also grade them using like low stakes methods like complete, incomplete, or 1 point for completing them as graded surveys on Canvas, Google Forms, or even short written reflections. Next slide, please. So a third point related to reflection and metacognition is that metacognition supports our students' development as writers across writing contexts. As Howard Tinberg suggests, when students are more aware of their own writing processes, they can adapt their processes to those new contexts, and they can troubleshoot more easily when their process doesn't map onto their new context well. One strategy for online co-requisite composition is the draft journal. And I know Elaine mentioned actually using a reflective journal throughout the semester. So a draft journal is a written record of students' thoughts, developments, and affective states around drafting. So creative writers use these a lot to keep track of their progress. These journals can be set up using Canvas groups and by creating a group discussion so that each student has their own private discussion. So it's just you and the student looking at their discussion, but that way they can have this like threaded capability. You can offer a new prompt each week about specific aspects of the writing process, or you can leave the journals open so that students can comment on what they feel is most important for that week or around that assignment. And it serves as a written record for students that they can look back on when they're writing their reflective statements, like Cassandra mentioned at the end of the semester. They can look for changes or developments in their own writing. Or if you have your students create e-portfolios and they write like an introductory letter to describe some of their growth over the semester, it works really well to give them that evidence to draw from. And then like other journals, you can use a really simple complete, incomplete grade, or like a 1 or 2 point rubric. And there are 2 resources on the handout for creating and using these draft journals. All right, next slide. Finally, meta-awareness is a tool that co-requisite composition is particularly well suited to teach students. And as Elizabeth Wardle writes, it's probably one of the most important things composition courses can do in general. Moving from early drafting stages through peer review and peer feedback stages to a final polished project requires many decisions, and we can help students become more aware of those decisions. I know that Emily mentioned earlier that you can do some modeling with your your own writing. So you can model what revision looks like using, feedback you've gotten from maybe journal reviewers, except don't use reviewer number 2, right? Reviewer number 2 is always the bad one. But you can model that for your students. Not only do they love that, but like Emily mentioned, it helps contribute to your own instructor presence online, and they get a better sense of you. They also see that professional writers think about revision. It doesn't just happen naturally for them, right? You can also model revision using a sample student paper with permission. And questions you might address in your modeling include, what do revisions actually look like on the page? And how is editing different from revision? Because again, many of our students come in thinking that spelling corrections are revision when they're not, they're editing. And then of course, what kinds of choices do real writers make throughout a project? How do I integrate reviewer 1's feedback, but also how do I placate reviewer 2, right? You can encourage students to complete the additional labor of revising and capturing revisions through the comment feature on Word or Google Doc, depending on what works best for your courses, and by offering either extra credit for this labor, or by requiring this labor and these explicit discussions of revision for any submitted revisions. That's how it typically works in my course. I just won't take revisions unless you've told me what you changed and really it's shown me those decisions. Students can also record think alouds about the revisions. Zoom is a free platform now, and many students also have computers that have recording capabilities on them. And so they can actually discuss the choices they made and walk through a paper or a paragraph. They can also write about their revision choices in a revision letter, which very much models, the academic publishing world. And these sorts of activities increase the intensity of our students' interactions in our courses, which helps them build cognitive presence in the course. And these activities also work well with labor contracts, which we'll learn about from Nayeli on Friday, as they can offer a way to differentiate between an A in a course and a B in a course, or for a particular project. The resources in the handout include a fantastic article that covers the logistics of teaching revision, like the recommendation of offering full points for revised work instead of partial credit, which I know is often what we do in our courses, as well as a source on writing revision letters that you can share with your students. And there's also a fun video that shows the practice of live grading, which some of my colleagues and I use at NSC to ensure students understand our feedback before revising. Next slide. So to summarize, reflection is troublesome for students, but it can also be troublesome for us. And so you may need to work intentionally to build reflection into your co-requisite composition courses. These opportunities can be tied to tasks or specific skills, and they can be strategically staggered throughout the semester. Modeling reflection and metacognitive awareness is important because it shows your students what those practices actually look like, and that professionals like you use those practices too. And you can offer your students the opportunity to capture their own revision using various modalities, which they're more comfortable with. And again, this links to Emily's discussion of, the liquid syllabus, which uses, web reading, which so many of them are used to doing. So before we go on to creating community, I'll just give you an opportunity if you want to jot any takeaways in the chat or any questions that we can maybe come back to at the end, or a topic that you're hoping to talk about a little bit more. And I'm going to go ahead and move on to community, but we can come back to these. So we'll have that record. Okay, so the next portion of our webinar will look at the important role of community in co-requisite composition courses and how to structure intentional opportunities for community building in those online asynchronous spaces. Before we go on, you may also want to listen to chat some reasons or just think, again, make some mental notes that we might share in our conversations later about why creating community in asynchronous courses is so challenging. And we probably already have some ideas that we can go to. Next slide, Emily. Thank you. So we all probably recognize how important creating community is in our face-to-face co-requisite courses. When students feel that they belong on campus, they're more likely to stick around and graduate. We also know that writing, the technologies that we use, the products we produce, and also our writing processes connect us to others, as Kevin Rusin notes. But we have all probably struggled to create community in our asynchronous courses. And so figuring out how to ensure that our students are in contact with others and with one another in those online course spaces and in a meaningful way is tough to do. Next slide, please. The first idea that we can use to shape these online spaces for building community is understanding how readers can learn from one another. We had a really excellent presentation on strategies for teaching reading earlier this spring in a webinar, but we can also think of those spaces of teaching reading as opportunities for building community as well. When we get students reading together, they learn from each other, they create zones of proximal development. We can do this using tools for group annotation, but we can also further build community through offering students additional opportunities to talk about the readings in small groups. Even in asynchronous online courses, many students are hungry for these synchronous opportunities. And for students who can't find the time to meet or choose not to with a small group of classmates, the discussion board can also serve as that additional space. The resources handout for this section includes an article about using Google Docs for collaborative reading. And I know somebody mentioned earlier in the chat around reflection that they do some collaborative work. Oh, I'm sorry, around peer review, that they do some collaborative work using Google Collaborate. And there are some screenshots of collaborative reading happening in my own courses that you can see. There's also some introductory videos on using Perusal and Hypothesis, which are really cool tools for collaborative annotations. There are benefits and drawbacks to each, I think. It depends on your institution as well. But if you're interested in something that is a little bit more quantifiable or structured, then those are opportunities. There's also a link to a Padlet with some practical guidelines for setting up these small group reading circles in an asynchronous course, as well as some student feedback on those small groups as a sustained practice throughout the semester. And overwhelmingly, if you take a look at that, students were really excited about having the opportunity to meet synchronously, even in an asynchronous course, because they got to know their classmates a little bit better. Next slide, please. Another big idea to be mindful of when thinking about community building in the online Corequisite course is in regard to discussions and keeping them authentic and student-centered spaces. The small group learning that happens in discussions can be integral to building those feelings of belonging in students, but the rhetorical situation of the online discussion is often a bit sticky. So how do we mirror authentic classroom discussions? In the classroom, students don't offer original responses to every question that we ask. And they certainly don't respond directly to two students within a certain amount of time using MLA citations. That's just not how the classroom discussion works. Additionally, without careful thought, our online discussion boards can actually lead to unconscious competence, where students don't put much thought into their activity, and instead they simply follow the required response pattern in the directions like summarize your peer's response in 2 sentences and offer a different perspective using at least one quote from the text. So we might ask ourselves, who are these discussions intended for, the teacher or the students? And also, are we grading them appropriately for that audience? One idea for the discussion board is to offer it up as a space where students can post a piece of writing and debate on what makes it effective or not. And this can be the student's own writing, but this can also be pieces that they find on the web. The resources on the handout include an article by Flower Darby on the logistics of good online discussions, such as engaging with your students as a discussant and considering group sizes for different kinds of discussions. In some discussions, having the whole class participate together is useful, but in other discussions, having a smaller amount of information and responses for them to read and respond to is probably better. There's also another article on how to keep discussions really interesting and authentic, including how to grade them to encourage real discussions. Finally, there's a screenshot of a fun discussion prompt from one of my courses that offered students a week off from the heavy lifting of the course. It was a course geared towards teaching literature for pre-education majors. And instead, it asked them to create children's storybook plot lines with emojis, which are defined as a type of paralanguage important to communicating in online spaces, and they could compete to win a virtual trophy. So just a couple of ideas there for really having those authentic discussions. All right, next slide. Another opportunity for building community is through peer review and peer feedback. Which again has been something that we've already kind of brought up in the chat. So when students have positive interactions with their peers, they experience affective association, which means that they are building social presence in the classroom space, and that's good for building community. However, we know that students do not typically enter college with good experiences with peer review, and without learning from us how to provide helpful feedback, peer review is unlikely to offer that opportunity for community building and may in fact do the opposite. However, we can scaffold the peer review or peer feedback process by offering students explicit guidance on the process, as well as multiple opportunities to practice it before they have to perform it with their peers. The resources on the handout include a helpful framework for students to use during peer review, describe, evaluate, suggest, and also include 2 activities intended to scaffold peer feedback for composition students. So one working individually and one working collaboratively with others to provide peer feedback. And finally, there are some resources for using rubrics on Canvas as guiding tools for effective peer feedback sessions. And these rubrics can be really helpful. Again, they offer students a guide so that they're not falling back on spelling correction or editing someone's grammar, which they may or may not be experts in. And it also helps tie their feedback to the actual assessment of that task, because it's the same rubric that you'll be using for their grade and assessment. All right, next slide. Finally, creating opportunities for social time without any academic pressure can provide more opportunities for your co-requisite students to build social presence and community, which we know is harder to create without those face-to-face interactions. These are no-stakes activities that just encourage students to connect and have fun. One idea for the space is a virtual water cooler, a space where students just stop by to grab a proverbial drink of water and some entertaining chat. These have been a really big thing for remote work in the tech industry this past year, and a Padlet linked from your Canvas homepage, or perhaps in those like weekly pages that lay out the work for everybody, would be a great way to set this up so students see it often and can click in. Students can post whenever they want, or you can offer them a schedule for posting. So maybe there's 2 students each week who have the opportunity to post something. And the resources on the handout offer 2 articles for considering virtual water coolers, especially in a higher education context. And then there's also a screenshot from my students' virtual water cooler this semester. And I'll just note that it was a synchronous online course, so the chat around the water cooler happened verbally on Zoom instead of Padlet, but you could easily just offer students that opportunity to comment and interact with each other. All right, last slide. So in the end, building community has many benefits, and it's something that we know we need to deliberately orchestrate for our students. Keep in mind that while we are teaching reading, we can also connect students to one another through collaborative annotations, but also through sustained small group learning. Our online discussion spaces, if thoughtfully considered, can also be spaces for community building. And peer review and peer feedback offer those same spaces to connect, but we need to carefully scaffold those processes, or we risk damaging those connections. And finally, we should remember that any opportunity for students to chat with one another is an opportunity to build community, even if it's not academic in nature, and that's good for them in the end. So the last, let's see, we have about 25 minutes left in this webinar, and what we hope to do was use some breakout rooms to talk about our takeaways, the way that we, the plans we might have for revising our courses. And it can also be some time where we ask questions as well. If there's something that wasn't clear or something that we'd just like to maybe discuss as a group, we also have that capability.
Laura, we would have groups of 3 or 4 in those groups. So do you want to put anything in the chat for what they want to talk about, and then how long would you like them to be?
What do you think? 10 minutes, Emily?
10 minutes sounds good.
Okay, yeah, 10 minutes. And I think in terms of chatting, I think, just on the screen, it says takeaways and then plans for improving our online co-recs over the summer. I think those would be, 2 excellent topics.
Start the recording again as we go back to Emily and Laura.
Did you guys have any questions that came up in your breakouts?
And people can unmute themselves to speak.
Maybe any of the practices that Emily and I offered that maybe were harder to conceptualize or see what they might look like, or if you dug around on the resources, maybe there was a question about one of those resources too.
We know we gave you a lot And we're hoping you'll return to the recording maybe this summer after you're done with the semester and you're thinking about fall, right?
Oh, I just posted my slide talk to everybody. I apologize. That is not what I meant to send. You're welcome. It's just what I said. I'm sorry, Elaine. There we go. There's the handout again. And I will post the PowerPoint once more too. It's very embarrassing.
Well, what did you guys talk about in terms of what your plans are to make changes to your classes? Have you thought that far ahead?
Well, you said we could unmute and
Yes,
speak up.
go
So
ahead.
one of the things that I just really appreciate, going back to one of my earlier comments, there were a few things I hadn't heard before, like things like a liquid syllabus, but a lot of them I'd heard, but it's so easy to hear a great idea and then forget it and not implement it. And so I just really appreciated how well this was put together, so that as a reminder, to be able to play the video and say, oh, this is a great idea. Let me stop right here. Let me apply this in my class.
Yes.
Okay, now let me go to the next piece and also use it for training for people, instructors who are new to online. And so many of these concepts really are applicable to any kind of class. So I really am just so grateful for the work you've done in pulling all these great concepts together into one place.
Yeah, that's a really good point. These best practices are best practices across the board, but we pick them because we think they're especially important for co-recs and online co-recs if you want them to be successful. So teaching a co-rec can make you a better teacher across the board. That's a selling point if you're trying to get faculty on your campus to teach the co-rec. Anything else?
I'm Robin. I teach at the College of Southern Nevada. And I was a little late, so thank you for dropping the file in. And Laura, don't be embarrassed. One time I actually shared an assignment from a class at UNLV with a whole audience. So this is not as bad as that. But I am a huge fan of reflection, and I use it in a variety of ways, including like metacognitive quick writes about failure and things like that. But what I had not thought about before is doing it verbally and allowing for that space for someone to do a talk aloud on revision, or for me to share my own I said like my own feelings to reviewer two. Like, I hate reviewer two, I'm nervous, I feel anxious, I feel ashamed from the comments, and kind of share my own process. So my class is probably way too read, write, and to offer that ability for people to speak out, or video, or do anything else in their reflections is going to be useful. So I thank you for that.
I think, it really connects us back to Elizabeth Miller and Rachel Herzl-Betz's presentation, even though Rachel wasn't with us that day. And, they talked about universal design for learning, which many of us are familiar with, or, are attempting to do in our face-to-face and online classes, but, offering students the opportunity, hey, you can write this, but if you would rather record yourself speaking, or, show me what you're doing, that's fine too. And, I included a live grading video when students submit final drafts. Oftentimes they're actually talking about their revision choices in front of me in my office. I mean, not so much right now, they're doing it on Zoom, but, there are lots of different ways to have students think about, what the choices they've made in revision, and then talk about those, and finding something that's comfortable for them can encourage them to, view that positively, instead of like, oh, I had to write this reflection, right? And I really hate writing, but, oh, I get to create a video. Oh, I love creating videos. Yeah, I'm gonna like totally enjoy this process, or maybe just not hate it quite as much. Yeah, photo reflection would be super cool. Absolutely.
Hey, Laura, since we're talking about revision, I had a question I jotted down about, you were saying that one option would be to give them full points for revision.
Yeah.
Do you mean like the points like that they didn't get up to 100, or what do you mean by full points?
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of depends on your grading. Again, on Friday, we're going to hear from Nayeli Villanueva about grading contracts. I know quite a few of us at NSC use grading contracts, but I know more faculty don't use them. So they'll using more traditional standards like points or percentages. But there's some research available that really shows that grades are not necessarily connected to motivation and like the products that students produce. And so one of the sources that I found that really aligns with my own personal beliefs in the classroom, and certainly not everybody's, is that when you offer only partial credit for revisions, you're really not valuing that work that goes into revisions. And you're really showing that like, if you weren't perfect the first time, you're never going to get there, right? I mean, perfect is like, okay, we're never going to get there, right? But there's actually some good reasons for offering full credit. So if you would normally have given, 100 points for this and they get 75 the first time, maybe offer them all, if they do the job. Again, it depends on your grading system. I think it works very well with contracts. It's a little bit trickier with points, but essentially, if you lost 10 points for this, let them make up all 10 points, right? Instead of 8 points. So again, it's not for everybody's teaching philosophy, but there is some scholarship and research out there that supports that position. We have like just 3 more minutes. Any other questions or just comments or something that maybe, we didn't quite get to, or that you heard today that like you're excited to just go research more for your own classes?
If any of you end up doing the liquid syllabus, it would be cool if you shared it. It's just fun to see how everybody's organizing, or even if it's a paper syllabi, and you're doing it as an infographic or whatever. It would be fun to share, to see what other people are doing. It makes teaching more fun. So keeps us engaged, which helps keep the students engaged, I think.
I think Kelly is here, not to put her on the spot, but she's actually leading a team this summer to revise or to create an English 100 co-requisite course that's fully online and asynchronous. And Kelly and I were just chatting, and she said that she wants her team to create a liquid syllabus. So we'll definitely have one to share.
Cool.
Judith, that's awesome. I'm glad that it's been helpful. Thank you for that comment. We really wanted some concrete things so that people could actually leave with concepts, but also strategies. So I'm glad that that it was helpful for you.
And again, if you guys have any questions later as you process everything, or not thinking about your current classes, feel free to email either one of us. We're happy to talk further about these ideas or other challenges you're having, and collaborate to come up with some solutions.
And this is Brandon from Complete College America. I just added a link in the chat to an evaluation. We appreciate your feedback and would love to hear what you think about this session. I want to extend a particular thank you to Emily and to Laura. As you saw, this was online instruction part 2. And this was a response to some of the previous professional development where people said that they wanted more and some more details, concrete examples specifically that could be put into place in classes within the context of Nevada. And we didn't initially have presenters identified, and Emily and Laura both stepped up to the plate, volunteered and said, hey, we would like to lead something. So really special thanks for you for that leadership, as well as the content that you provided today. So with that, we will come to a close, and we will see you at our final professional development, which will be this Friday. And of course, all of the sessions are available online. So until then, thank you again for attending today's session.
Thank you, everybody.